What's happening? This is Lynn Davis. I'm a Seattle-based filmmaker with Pangiality Productions, and I'm here in New York City. Came to town for my friends Robin and Peter's beautiful wedding.
And now, for their first song and first dance together, a very special song selection featuring Noel.
And it's now Tuesday, October 22nd or 3rd, 2018, and I'm sitting here in Washington Square Park, and I met this gentleman, Michael.
Hello.
Who's an astrologer here in Washington Square Park, of all places. Can you just give me a sense of where are we in the world? Like what's unique about where we are here?
We're in New York, one of the capitals of the world, according to whatever definition you hold to be true. And this park is historically, at least after World War II, has been a stronghold of bohemian culture in New York and also maybe the world.
Right. And so just to give a little bit of context, I mean, this is so sort of the epicenter globally of bohemian culture throughout the decades.
Certainly one of them. All right.
You give astrological readings here in the park, yeah?
That's right.
Nice. I'm curious, can you tell me a little bit about how it works? And then I want to get into sort of your perspective on other things based on your perch and where we're at.
Sure.
So how does an astrology reading work, and what kind of work do you do with strangers who approach, yeah?
Okay, so I'll start by saying that astrology is an art of intuitive symbol interpretation. Many people say that it's a pseudoscience. I don't happen to agree with that. I don't really think it's a science, it's really an art. The science comes in the placement of the planets in the chart, but what an astrologer does, and the kind I do, is a psychological interpretation. There are many kinds. There are financial astrologers. There's a kind of astrology where if you lose your keys, you can do a chart and it will tell you where they are. But I do what's known as kind of like a modern or contemporary psychological-based astrology. And what that is that we get the birth time of the person, and that sets up a diagram, which people call the horoscope or the natal chart.
And you have one right here?
Well, this is actually the chart of what's happening right now in the sky. But say if somebody was born in the vicinity right now at this minute, that would be their birth chart. So, and then based on where the symbols are and how they relate to each other, the symbols indicate certain energies, and we look at how they relate to each other and how they have a pattern.
So that pattern represents itself in a chart once you plug in the details, and then your reading is of the information based on the alignment of the planets at that moment?
I would be reading a chart just like this, where there are symbols. The symbols have certain meaning, and also they have a meaning in relation to each other. So there are all these layers of complexity that are being determined by the chart, and that's what's being interpreted. And I know nowadays a lot of people are into astrology. They use websites and apps, but mostly these are compilations, and you read them linearly, one after another. Astrologers call it like a cookbook approach, but when you go to a real astrologer, they synthesize everything and bring everything together as like a gestalt, a wholeness of the chart, to give the person an insight into more integral meaning and less just a simple compilation of parts that you then have to, you don't know how they relate to each other.
And so you're interpreting the chart based on that, but then there's your individual take on how that gets transmitted to them in terms of...
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, I tell people who are really into astrology, go get your chart read by 100 different astrologers if you can, or even 10, let's say, to be more realistic. So each one will give a completely different reading, but yet you will always get some insight about yourself if they're competent, if they're a competent practitioner.
So I'm curious about what you feel like you've learned about the world, or specifically about America, even though this is a very global place in the US, but based on the work you do, ideas you have about, as broad as this is, humanity. What lessons have you learned based on this particular place in the planet and the work that you do?
The one thing that continues to blow me away every time is that everybody is absolutely a unique being, without question. And doing a chart just reiterates that premise over and over and over again. It's amazing. I'm more amazed than anybody when I read a chart, because when I tell people things and they tell me the feedback, I just can't believe that.
The validity, or just the connections to what you've interpreted prior to them affirming it, or what?
It's the validity, but mainly just their absolute uniqueness in the universe. It's just astonishing.
Yeah. And I mean, I was just, being here and just so many people, I was just watching the eyes of the people passing you. You're doing your reading, but just the sort of way that there's so much foot traffic, and the way that people perceive whatever it is that you're doing catches their attention. They see this simple sign, and you can see them sort of processing like, ooh, like what's going on right here.
A lot of people do look at the sign when they go by. I don't know what they're thinking, but a very small percentage of those people actually inquire about a reading. But a lot of people look at the sign. I don't know why. I mean, we're living in a time when there's supposedly a growing interest in occultism and mysticism, and in particular astrology. I hear that about young people. We're also in a time when there's a very strong history in Western culture, specifically about the invalidation of such practices as being not rational or not scientific. And for me, that's why I said it's an art form, because I don't believe that things that are supra-rational are necessarily not truthful or truth. They're not necessarily false just because they're not rational. And so I think that intellectual conceit is a prejudice that a lot of people have. It's just because of the way people are brought up in our culture. I think based on my experience, most of the people who come to an astrologer have already had some kinds of inner experiences or an inner dialogue or an inner search that prepares them for the reading. They're looking for something, they know they're looking for something, they're cognizant of their life experiences in a deeper way. It's not superficial. So they intuit that the same kind of language that they're used to in their own self-examination is going to come into play in the reading, or they know it either concretely or intuitively. And often people who come for a reading are anticipating or experiencing some kind of change, and they don't know specifically what it is, but they want clarity. They want some kind of insight into what are the symbolic issues at play. So that's something else that happens.
So can I ask you this? As I was walking through the park, I saw you, and I chose to sit down next to you.
Yeah.
And while I was looking around and enjoying the music and watching people, I was consciously attempting to listen to your reading, and I was simultaneously asking myself, is this a total invasion of this person's privacy that is getting the reading?
What, you mean you sitting next to me
And
listening to someone's...
Or whether here we are in the most public of places in Washington Square Park in New York City, and sitting next to a bench on you and listening in is just, there can be no illusion of privacy in such a public space. How do you feel about that? Is that invasive or inappropriate for me to listen?
I think it is, but there's obviously a fine line, and I'm relying on the client to make eye contact or to give some indication that maybe they're uncomfortable. Usually it doesn't happen, but you were sitting very close, and if you were deliberately eavesdropping, then that presents an issue, because it really is a very personal thing. People talk about their money and their relationship lives and their aspirations and things, so it does get very personal. But at the same time, we're in a context where I actually use the music to some extent to be a mask of that kind of issue, to help cover up the personal privacy thing.
Nice. I'm sorry to have invaded, and I felt that
okay.
would be legit. And at the same time, to tell you the truth, I reached out to 2 close friends while I was sitting here to sort of pose the question. Maybe you saw earlier, 20 minutes ago, there was sunshine, and I took a silhouette of our shadows, a photo of our shadows, because it so clearly illustrated the notion of
Close
here I am
together,
sitting on a bench, and here's these people, the guy giving a reading.
Yeah.
And me feeling like I was sort of invading privacy by listening, but at the same time, this notion of this is the greatest essence of public space ever, to be in Washington Square Park.
It's an interesting thing. I would say the very fact that you intuited that there might have been an invasion of privacy tells you that you also understood that I'm telling somebody some very personal information, having never met them before and just looking at this. And they're listening to me and saying, oh yeah, that's very plausible, or that describes me to a T. It just shows you the power of the instrument to be a great tool for self-awareness in the hands of somebody who knows what they're doing. I mean, obviously there are hoaxes, but I'd like to think that that's not me.
You see yourself as someone who knows what they're doing.
I hope so, you know.
Nice. Are there other manifestations of what you feel you know about the world or have learned about humanity, specifically based on, how long have you been doing this in this space?
In this space, only a few months. I was working in another park, and I've always done astrology for many years, but never professionally. I always had another means of income, but I just decided to make a change because I just wanted to do this more now. So. And
how does the payment structure work?
I don't really have a fee. I don't know if technically it's legal to charge a fee, but I just say to people, I don't have a fee, but I accept voluntary donations. And to me, that puts it more in the realm of like free speech, or
and that being
borrowing
said,
money from your friend for lunch or something, you know.
And that being said, in your work here, how does it work out? How many hours do you spend, and what kinds of ways do people interpret that openness in terms of what does that translate to?
I think people are surprised. They're more receptive when they find there isn't a set fee, and everybody has different means, and so I think it makes it much more democratic. And fortunately, for various reasons that I won't get into, I'm not dependent on this to make a living. I have other ways of doing that, and I'm married. My wife has a business, and so I can do this as a service, and for people who are so inclined and wanted to partake. So it's interesting for me to interface with strangers and tell them things that maybe they want to know or need to know.
Nice. Do you have a presence online that people who see this video who might become interested in getting a reading can, or it doesn't?
No, it's completely spontaneous. And
got it. So give me a sense of what people typically, what does that translate to, that openness and the gifting economy / interpretation of free speech / being an entrepreneur and just sharing this?
I would say that the majority of people give nothing, and some people are very generous, because also I deal with people who have nothing and people who are also very successful. You get the whole range.
Right.
And I can't pick and choose who's interested. So,
Michael, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
So once
Happy
again,
to do it.
thank you. Once again, I'm Len Davis. I'm a Seattle-based filmmaker, and I'm here in New York City for my dear friends Robin and Pete's wedding. And a couple days later, I'm chilling in Washington Square Park, listening to some jazz, and I met Michael here and learned a little bit about astrology. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Cool. Stay fresh.